She had no idea whose name she had just painted over. The smell hit me before I reached the driveway. Sharp latex paint mixed with August heat and fresh-cut grass. The kind of chemical sweetness that sticks to the back of your throat. I turned onto Hawthorne Lane and saw a white Lexus parked beside my mailbox. Cynthia Whitmore's Lexus. My stomach tightened. Then I heard the roller. Soft. Wet. Rhythmic. SHHHK. 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 Two painters stood beside my garage with buckets at their feet, covering the entire west wall in flat blue-gray paint. For almost 30 years, that wall had held a mural my father refused to touch. A sweeping landscape of Pennsylvania hills, rust-colored barns, railroad tracks, and a sunset painted so wide that when I was a kid, I used to stand 10 feet away and pretend the garage opened into another world. Now half of it was gone. "Stop painting," I shouted as I stepped out. One painter froze with his roller halfway up the wall. The other looked toward Cynthia. That told me everything. She stood near the Lexus wearing cream slacks, sunglasses, and the same polished smile she had worn through every HOA hearing she had dragged me into. A clipboard rested against her hip. "Ethan," she said, almost cheerfully, "you're home early." I walked toward the garage. My boots scraped across the concrete. The painter lowered his roller, and a thick line of gray paint crawled downward through what remained of an orange sunset. "Who authorized this?" I asked. Cynthia lifted the clipboard. "The association did. You've ignored repeated notices concerning unauthorized exterior artwork. The board approved corrective remediation." Corrective remediation. She said it like she was fixing a cracked gutter. I stared at the wall. A painted red barn was disappearing beneath the roller. Cynthia followed my eyes and gave a little sigh. "Honestly, Ethan, it was deteriorating anyway. This looks much cleaner." I did not argue. I did not touch the painters. I did not give Cynthia the scene she clearly expected. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took pictures. The buckets, the company truck, her Lexus, her clipboard, every inch of that gray wall. Her smile faded. "What are you doing?" "Documenting." One word. That was all I gave her. Then I looked above my garage door at the small black security camera I had installed 3 months earlier. Its green status light was blinking. Cynthia had not noticed it. Neither had the painters. But it had noticed them. It had noticed everything. Cynthia tapped her clipboard and told me the painting cost would be added to my HOA account. I almost laughed. What she did not know was that somewhere beneath that fresh gray paint was the signature of a man whose work had not always been valuable. Back when I knew him, Julian Mercer was just my father's broke artist friend who drank gas station coffee in our garage and sometimes paid for lumber by painting. But 30 years can change what a name means. And before that week was over, Cynthia Whitmore was going to learn exactly what those 2 little letters on my garage wall were worth. I stood there until the painters packed their rollers into plastic bags and loaded the last bucket onto their truck. Cynthia stayed long enough to remind me that the cost of the job would appear on my next association statement. Then her white Lexus rolled away as quietly as if nothing important had happened. I waited until the street was empty before walking back toward the garage. Up close, the gray looked even worse. Brush marks crossed the old stucco in uneven bands, and tiny streaks of orange still showed near the bottom where the roller had missed a shallow crack. I touched one dry corner with my fingertip. That wall had been there longer than Hawthorne Ridge had an association. My father, Daniel Cole, bought the house in 1993 when this neighborhood was mostly open lots, maple trees, and construction trailers. I grew up around the smell of cedar boards and sawdust. Every Saturday morning, his table saw started before the neighborhood lawn mowers. Julian Mercer showed up 2 years later. Back then, Julian was not anybody people would recognize. He was 30-something, always broke, always carrying paint somewhere on his clothes, and driving an old Ford van that sounded tired before it even reached our driveway. He and Dad had met through a renovation job downtown. Julian needed workspace. Dad had a garage wall nobody cared about. That was apparently enough to start a friendship. I was 11 when Julian began painting it. Dad worked inside with the garage door open, sanding cabinet doors while an old radio played baseball. For weeks, the wall changed every afternoon. Green hills appeared first, then barns, railroad tracks, a narrow creek. Finally came the sunset, layered in orange, copper, and deep red. Julian never explained what it was supposed to mean. He just told me good paintings should leave enough room for people to bring their own memories. When he finished, Dad stood about 15 feet back, wiped sawdust from his hands, and stared at it for a long time. From that day forward, nobody touched that wall. Years later, when the colors started fading, I suggested repainting part of it. Dad shook his head. Some things become valuable because somebody bothered to leave them alone, he said. I thought he meant valuable to us. After Dad died, I inherited the house and everything he had stubbornly refused to throw away. His clamps still hung above the workbench. His pencil marks were still on the doorframe. I had not opened it since settling the estate. Standing beneath that blinking security camera, staring at Cynthia's gray paint, I suddenly remembered something else. One of those photographs showed Julian standing beside the finished mural. And unlike the faded signature Cynthia had just covered, the photograph showed his name perfectly. I should have gone upstairs immediately and found it. Instead, I stayed in the driveway another minute, looking at the last streaks of orange trapped beneath the gray. I remembered Dad standing in exactly the same place, arms crossed, studying Julian's finished work. He had never cared whether anybody else thought the mural belonged there. He cared that his friend had made it. That had always been enough. Until Cynthia decided it was not. Cynthia had been preparing for that morning long before the first roller touched my garage. I understood that when I sat at my kitchen table that evening and spread 6 months of association notices across the wood like a paper trail leading straight to her. The first one had arrived in March. Exterior artwork inconsistent with community appearance standards. I remembered laughing when I read it. Hawthorne Ridge had existed as a formal homeowners association for less than 20 years. The mural had been on that garage since 1995. I sent Cynthia a polite email explaining exactly that. Her response came 43 minutes later. Age does not create compliance, she wrote. That sentence told me more about Cynthia Whitmore than an entire biography could have. She had moved into Hawthorne Ridge 5 years earlier and joined the board within 8 months. By the second year, she was president. Cynthia treated the neighborhood like a property listing she was permanently staging for photographs. Approved mailbox colors. Approved porch lights. Approved fence stains. Sometimes she carried a clipboard. Sometimes she photographed houses with her phone. She always called it protecting property values. I called it looking for problems that did not exist. My garage became her favorite problem. In April, she appeared in my driveway while I was replacing a warped oak cabinet door for a client. Sandstone, almond, heritage beige, colonial cream, slate blue, hawthorn gray. The names sounded like somebody had found 6 ways to describe surrender. Cynthia tapped hawthorn gray with one manicured fingernail. This would look very tasteful, she said. I told her the mural was staying. Her smile tightened. Ethan, buyers want consistency. I reminded her that I was not selling my house. She looked past me at the painted hills and barns as if they had personally offended her. Everyone sells eventually, she said. That was Cynthia. She could turn somebody else's home into a future commission in her head before finishing a conversation. The notices became more aggressive after that. First came a $100 fine, then $250, then $500. Each envelope smelled faintly of printer toner and arrived with another deadline. I challenged everyone in writing. I requested the specific covenant giving the association authority to alter artwork that existed before its current design rules. Cynthia never provided a clear answer. Instead, she scheduled a compliance hearing. I walked into the clubhouse carrying property records, dated photographs, and copies of every email. Cynthia sat at the center of a folding table beneath fluorescent lights, her cream-colored clipboard directly in front of her. She barely looked at my documents. The board has broad authority to preserve neighborhood aesthetics, she said. I asked whether broad authority included entering private property and changing it without permission. For the first time that evening, the room went quiet. Cynthia leaned back and folded her hands. We would never need to do that if homeowners cooperated voluntarily, she said. I remember that sentence because it was the reason I ordered the security camera the next morning. Until then, I had thought Cynthia wanted to pressure me into repainting the wall myself. After that meeting, I realized she was already thinking about what would happen if I refused. I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat and Dad's words repeating in my head. Some things become valuable because somebody bothered to leave them alone. Cynthia was making it increasingly clear that leaving this one alone was the only option she would not consider. The camera arrived 2 days later in a cardboard box barely bigger than my hand. I mounted it above the garage door, angled wide enough to capture the driveway, the mural, and anyone approaching from the sidewalk. Cynthia noticed it almost immediately. The next Thursday, her Lexus slowed in front of my house, and I watched through the kitchen window as she stared directly at the little black camera. She did not wave. 3 days later, another certified envelope appeared in my mailbox. This one was different. The paper was heavier, the language colder. Final notice of exterior remediation. According to Cynthia, I had 10 business days to bring the garage into compliance, or the association could arrange corrective work and charge the expense to my account. I emailed back that same afternoon. I stated clearly that nobody had permission to enter my property, alter the garage, or touch the mural while my appeal remained unresolved. I copied every board member. Cynthia answered the next morning. The board has authorized corrective painting if the owner refuses compliance. I printed that sentence and put it in a folder. Something about it bothered me. Maybe it was how confidently she wrote it. I called Martin Hayes, the association treasurer, a quiet accountant who lived 3 streets over. Martin sounded confused when I mentioned corrective painting. He said he remembered discussing my violation, but he did not remember voting to send contractors onto my property. Before I could ask more, his voice became careful. You should probably bring that up at the next meeting, Ethan. Then he ended the call. That was when I stopped treating Cynthia's letters as neighborhood nonsense. I started saving everything. Every envelope, every email, every photograph. I downloaded the camera footage each week and backed it up on a separate drive in my workshop. I photographed the mural in morning light, afternoon light, and close enough to capture the cracks in the stucco and Julian's faded initials near the lower corner. On Monday morning, I left home at 7:15 for a restoration job about 40 miles away. The sky was clear. The mural was untouched. At 9:38, my phone sent a motion alert. I was standing inside an old farmhouse measuring a staircase when I opened the camera application. Cynthia's Lexus was in my driveway. A painting contractor's truck pulled in behind her. I watched her walk toward the garage carrying that cream clipboard. One painter pointed at the mural, then at the house. Even without clear audio, I could see the hesitation in his posture. Cynthia handed him a sheet of paper. He read it. She pointed at the wall again. A few minutes later, the camera microphone caught his voice. Are you sure the owner approved this? Cynthia answered without hesitation. The association has authority. I watched her sign the work order against the hood of her Lexus. Then the lid came off a 5-gallon bucket of Hawthorne gray. The first roller touched the painted sky at 9:52. For a second, I wanted to call Cynthia. Then I wanted to call the contractor. Instead, I downloaded the clip before doing anything else. I saved it to my phone. Then I sent a copy to my email. Only after that did I pack my tools. By the time I started driving home, Julian's hills were already disappearing. Cynthia believed she was creating compliance. What she was actually creating was evidence. After Cynthia left, I waited until the gray paint had stopped shining in the afternoon sun before I went back outside. The neighborhood was quiet again. Sprinklers clicked across somebody's lawn. A delivery truck hummed 2 streets over. Everything looked ordinary except my garage. I photographed every section from about 6 feet away, then moved closer and documented the roller marks, the paint drips along the foundation, and the small orange fragments still visible inside the roughest cracks. I saved the security footage in 3 places. Then I printed Cynthia's email, the violation notices, and the photograph of her signing the contractor's work order against her Lexus. By sunset, my dining table looked less like a place to eat and more like an evidence archive. That should have been enough for one day. It was not. I kept thinking about the metal box above the garage. My flashlight swept across Christmas decorations, Dad's old fishing gear, and boxes labeled in his blocky handwriting. Gray steel, rust around one hinge. My father's initials written across the lid with black marker. I carried it downstairs and set it on his old workbench. The latch made a dry click. Inside were envelopes, receipts, snapshots, and Polaroids curled slightly at the edges. I found Julian on the 7th photograph. He looked impossibly young, standing beside Dad with paint on his jeans and a paper coffee cup in one hand. Behind them was the mural, newly finished, every color bright enough to make the photograph feel warm. Near the lower right corner, perfectly visible, was the signature Cynthia had buried that morning. Julian Mercer. 1995. Under the photographs was a folded letter addressed to Dad. Julian thanked him for letting him use the wall and called the mural one of the first pieces where he had finally painted something. That felt like home. I sat down. Then I searched his name. Museum exhibitions, gallery retrospectives, newspaper profiles, photographs of an older Julian standing beside enormous works I had never seen. Then I found his obituary. Same eyes, same crooked smile. Julian had died 4 years earlier. His work was now administered by the Mercer estate. I looked from the computer screen to the Polaroid in my hand. The man described online as an important American muralist was the same broke artist who used to borrow Dad's extension cords and leave coffee rings on our workbench. I did not know what the garage mural was worth. I did not even know whether anyone outside my family knew it existed. So I did the simplest thing I could. I found the estate's contact address and wrote a short email explaining who I was. I attached 6 photographs: Julian painting, Julian with Dad, the completed mural, the signature, the wall before Cynthia arrived, and the wall after she left. I added the security footage timestamp and one sentence about what had happened. Then I pressed send. At 8:12 the next morning, my phone rang from a New York number. A woman introduced herself as Rebecca Mercer. She did not ask about Cynthia. She did not ask about the Homeowners Association. Her first question was quiet and precise. How much of my father's mural is still visible? I looked through the kitchen window at the gray garage wall. None that I can see, I said. Then Rebecca said 4 words that changed the entire situation. Do not touch that wall. Rebecca asked me to send everything before noon. Not just the photographs. Everything. The original Polaroids, the letter Julian wrote to Dad, the security footage, Cynthia's emails, the violation notices, and the contractor paperwork. By 10:30, Rebecca had copied 2 other people into the email chain. One was an attorney representing the Mercer estate. The other was an art conservator from Philadelphia. Their questions were painfully specific. Had the wall ever been moved? No. Had the mural been restored? No. Had anyone painted over any section before that morning? Never. Did I have photographs showing Julian physically working on the wall? I did. One Polaroid showed him on a 12-foot ladder painting the upper edge of the sunset. Another showed Dad holding a tray of brushes while Julian worked near the railroad tracks. The conservator asked me to photograph the garage corners, foundation, roofline, and every place where the new paint had missed the original surface. I spent an hour outside with my phone 6 inches from the stucco. The air smelled like warm latex. Tiny fragments of copper, green, and red survived inside shallow pits where Cynthia's contractor had failed to push the roller deep enough. At 1:14 that afternoon, Rebecca called again. Her voice had changed. The first time, she sounded like a daughter worried about something her father had made. Now she sounded like someone assembling a record. She told me the estate had known about an early Mercer mural connected to a Pennsylvania cabinet maker named Daniel Cole, but nobody had confirmed its location after Julian's records were reorganized years earlier. My father's letter and photographs connected the missing entry to my garage. The date matched. The imagery matched Julian's notes. Most importantly, the photographs established a continuous history that could not be manufactured after the fact. Provenance, Rebecca called it. I looked at Dad's dusty metal box sitting open on the table. To him, it had just been memories worth keeping. Now every curled photograph inside it mattered. Rebecca still refused to discuss a dollar figure. Instead, she told me something more important. Do not scrape the paint. Do not pressure wash it. Do not let the Homeowners Association send anyone else onto the wall. A conservator needed to determine whether portions of Julian's original paint remained beneath Cynthia's coating. Cynthia responded 11 minutes later. The remediation is complete, Ethan. There is nothing further to discuss. I printed that one too. Rebecca came with him. She stood in my driveway for nearly a minute without speaking, staring at the flat gray rectangle where her father's landscape had been. Then I handed her the Polaroid of Julian and Dad. She held it by the edges. Her expression softened. I have not seen this picture since I was a child, she said. That was when the story stopped being about my fight with Cynthia. This wall belonged to 2 families' memories now. The conservator examined one exposed crack near the foundation and finally looked up. There is original pigment under here, he said. Rebecca turned toward me. For the first time since the painting disappeared, I felt something other than anger. Hope. Not much, but enough. Then Rebecca asked for the security video again. I played the section where the contractor questioned Cynthia's authority. We watched Cynthia point toward the wall, sign the work order, and tell him to continue. Rebecca's attorney paused the recording on Cynthia's signature. Nobody said anything for a moment. He simply wrote down the timestamp. Cynthia had spent months creating paperwork because she thought paperwork made her powerful. She was about to discover that paperwork works both ways. The next homeowners association meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 7 in the clubhouse, and Cynthia apparently believed she had won. On Tuesday morning, another envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a new violation notice for the garage. I read it twice before I understood the joke. Improper exterior color. Hawthorne gray, the exact paint Cynthia had ordered, apparently did not match the approved finish because the contractor had used the wrong sheen. Then I added the notice to my folder. Thursday evening, I arrived 10 minutes early carrying that folder under one arm. The clubhouse smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner. Folding chairs faced the board table. Cynthia sat in the center wearing a navy blazer, her cream clipboard positioned neatly beside a brass nameplate. Martin Hayes, the treasurer, sat 3 seats away and avoided looking at her. About 20 homeowners had shown up. Cynthia opened the meeting exactly at 7. Her voice became almost ceremonial. Ethan Cole, continuing exterior compliance matter. She looked at me over her glasses. Ethan, we hope tonight you are finally prepared to cooperate. I stood and placed my folder on the table. I am prepared to document what happened, I said. Cynthia gave that thin smile again. We have already documented it. The association corrected the violation after repeated notices. That was when the clubhouse door opened behind me. Rebecca Mercer walked in carrying a leather portfolio. Beside her was the estate's attorney, Thomas Avery. Cynthia stopped speaking. Rebecca took a seat near the front. Thomas remained standing. He introduced himself, stated that he represented the Mercer estate, and asked whether Cynthia Whitmore was the person who had authorized painting over the exterior artwork at my address. Cynthia immediately pointed toward the other board members. The association authorized remediation, she said. Martin finally looked up. I never voted to authorize entry onto Ethan's property. Another board member quietly said neither did she. The room changed. You could feel it before anyone spoke. Cynthia's fingers tightened around her pen. Thomas opened his portfolio. He placed copies of Cynthia's email on the table. Then the contractor work order. Then a still image from my security camera showing Cynthia signing it against the hood of her Lexus. Each page landed with a soft slap. Cynthia tried another direction. Nobody knew that painting had any value, she said. Rebecca spoke for the first time. My father knew. Ethan's father knew. And the records you were given showed that the work existed decades before your current design rules. Cynthia looked toward me. I said nothing. Thomas slid one final envelope across the table. It stopped directly in front of her clipboard. He explained that the estate had completed its preliminary review of the mural's provenance, documented destruction, conservation costs, loss associated with the work, and related claims. The demand stated in that letter exceeded $1 million. Nobody moved. Even the old air conditioner seemed suddenly loud. Cynthia stared at the envelope. Over $1 million? She asked. Thomas did not dramatize the answer. That is the estate's preliminary demand. It is not a judgment, and final responsibility remains to be determined. Cynthia whispered that the contractor should be responsible. I reached into my folder and placed her signed authorization. Beside the envelope, she said the board approved everything. Martin placed the meeting records on the table. No recorded vote. She said I had refused every reasonable solution. I placed my written appeal beside the minutes. That was the moment I understood what patience had bought me. I never needed to outshout Cynthia. I only needed to let her keep signing her name. The meeting did not end when Cynthia opened the envelope. That was when the real question started. Martin Hayes asked Thomas Avery to explain exactly who the demand was directed toward. Thomas answered carefully. The estate was preserving claims against every potentially responsible party while determining who had authorized the work, who had paid for it, and whether association funds had been used properly. That last sentence changed Martin's expression. He opened his laptop and asked Cynthia which account had paid the contractor. Cynthia said it was a routine maintenance expense. Martin shook his head. Exterior work on a privately owned structure was not routine maintenance, and any expense above the board's approval threshold required authorization in the meeting records. He searched for it. Nothing. Cynthia's pen stopped moving. One homeowner near the back asked how much the painting had cost. Martin found the transaction. For $1,800, paid directly from the association operating account. The room filled with low voices. Cynthia tried to regain control. She said the expenditure had been necessary to protect community standards. Thomas asked for the recorded vote authorizing it. Cynthia repeated that the board had discussed my property several times. Discussing something, Martin said, is not approving a payment. That distinction landed harder than any speech could have. Over the next 20 minutes, the little system Cynthia had built around herself began coming apart one document at a time. Her email claimed the board authorized corrective painting. The minutes showed no vote. The contractor invoice listed Cynthia as the association contact. The work order carried her signature. My written notice explicitly denied permission to enter the property. The security footage showed the contractor asking whether the owner had approved the work. Cynthia's answer was recorded clearly. The association has authority. Then Rebecca placed the old Polaroid on the table. The colors had faded around the edges, but Julian's signature was unmistakable. Beside it, Thomas placed a recent photograph showing the same corner covered in hawthorn gray. Cynthia stared at the two images. For the first time since I had known her, she had nothing ready to say. The board called an emergency executive session. I waited outside with Rebecca while the August air cooled and moths circled the clubhouse lights. 27 minutes later, Martin opened the door. Cynthia walked out first. No clipboard this time. Martin announced that Cynthia had been suspended from all presidential authority, pending an independent review. The association's insurer and legal counsel would be notified immediately. An outside accountant would examine expenditures authorized during her term. Over the following weeks, homeowners began requesting records of other fines, contractor payments, and enforcement actions. What started with my garage widened into questions Cynthia could no longer answer from behind a polished smile. I did not celebrate. I still had a gray wall where something irreplaceable had been. The $1 million demand did not magically restore Julian's sunset. Cynthia losing her authority did not bring Dad back to his workbench. Winning the argument and repairing the damage were two different things. But one Friday afternoon, Rebecca called with news from the conservator. Enough original pigment appeared to remain beneath the newer coating that careful conservation might recover portions of Julian's work. I stepped outside while she explained the process. The sun was setting behind the maple trees, turning Cynthia's gray paint almost silver. For weeks, that color had looked like an ending. Now, for the first time, I could see it for what it really was. A temporary layer. The conservators came back 3 weeks later on a cool September morning. And for the first time since Cynthia changed that wall, I heard something besides a paint roller moving across it. The sound was slower now, careful and almost delicate. Rebecca stood beside me in the driveway while the team tested small sections near the foundation. Nobody promised a miracle. Too much had been covered, and some areas had been damaged beyond meaningful recovery. But beneath portions of that flat gray coating, Julian's original colors were still there. Copper appeared first, then a narrow line of green. I watched those familiar shapes return inch by inch, and suddenly I was 11 years old again, sitting on an upside-down bucket while Dad sanded cabinet doors inside the garage. The restoration took months. The goal was never to make the mural look brand new. Rebecca said that would erase its history almost as surely as Cynthia had tried to erase the painting itself. They preserved what could be preserved, stabilized what remained, and documented every surviving section. By winter, enough of Julian's landscape had returned that I could recognize the hills, the creek, part of the red barn, and most of that enormous sunset. The estate and the association eventually resolved the legal dispute through attorneys and insurers. I was not involved in every detail, and I did not need to be. The 7-figure demand had done what it needed to do. It forced everyone to stop treating Cynthia's decision like a neighborhood paint dispute and start treating it like the destruction of something that belonged to someone else. Cynthia never returned as president. The board adopted new rules requiring recorded approval for enforcement expenses and written owner consent before contractors could enter private property, except in a genuine emergency. Martin became interim president, although he joked that the first thing he planned to do with his new authority was use as little of it as possible. As for Cynthia, I saw her Lexus occasionally for another few months. It moved through Hawthorne Ridge faster now. No slow inspections. No clipboard against the steering wheel. No photographs of garden hoses. Then one morning a real estate sign appeared in her yard. By spring, the Lexus was gone. I kept Dad's metal box, but I stopped storing it in the attic. The Polaroid of him and Julian now hangs inside the garage in a simple oak frame I built myself. Beside it is Julian's old letter. And beneath both of them is something Rebecca thought was strange until I explained it. A small preserved chip of Hawthorne gray. The paint Cynthia chose. The paint she believed would make everything clean, uniform, and compliant. I kept it because every important object in this story eventually meant the opposite of what Cynthia intended. Her clipboard became a paper trail. Her work order became proof. Her contractor became a witness. Her preferred color became evidence. Even the wall she tried to erase became more carefully documented than it had ever been before. Some evenings, when the setting sun hits the restored copper pigments, I can still see where the newer paint once covered them. I do not mind the scars. They belong to the history now. Dad used to say some things become valuable because somebody bothered to leave them alone. When somebody refuses to leave those things alone, you do not always need to shout. Sometimes you photograph everything. You save every email. You keep every receipt. You let them sign their own name. Justice is rarely as loud as the people who abuse authority. It is simply more patient, and eventually, it keeps the better records. And every time I look at Julian's restored sunset now, I think about the moment Cynthia stood in my driveway and told me the gray wall looked cleaner. She had been so certain that covering something meant controlling it. If you came home and found your HOA doing this to something your family had protected for almost 30 years, what would you have done? Would you have stopped the painters, called an attorney immediately, or done what I did and documented every detail before making your next move? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know where you would have drawn the line. And if you enjoy stories where arrogant decisions create consequences nobody sees coming, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the person holding the clipboard thinks they have all the power, right up until the paperwork tells a completely different story.